one of my favorite ways to save money and increase versatility in sleep system is to go with the 2-bag system. A lot of people will ask why they shouldn't just get a dedicated winter bag, and that's certainly an option, but most people don't do enough dedicated winter trips to justify that expensive, big -20, -10 degree down bag. And so I tend to recommend and like a 2-bag system, a 3-season down bag, like a 20 degree Enigma or Revelation, coupled with our Revelation Apex in more like a 40 or 50 degree. This allows you to get that same winter temperature rating in 2 bags that you already own. You can use your synthetic bag all summer and your 3-season bag for obviously all your 3-season use. It allows you to just get a little more bang for your buck. You already have to own a summer bag and a 3-season bag. It saves you from having to buy a winter bag. So just from a cost perspective, I think there's a big advantage. There's also a really big advantage to having a synthetic outer layer in your winter sleep system. As the temperature drops, the dew point obviously moves closer to you as a sleeper. And so if you have a down inner bag, your primary insulation in this system is your 20 degree Revelation or Enigma, and that's going to trap the vast majority of your heat, with the synthetic bag just giving it a little boost. And what happens is you're all night you're pumping moisture through your bag system, and in a 2-bag system you pump it out of your first bag and into the second bag before it starts to frost or condense and freeze. And so in winter, frozen insulation becomes a big problem on long trips. If you just have one down bag, that insulation is going to become more and more condensed, more and more thick with frozen insulation as the trip goes on. And so if the outer layer is synthetic, you keep that frozen layer in the synthetic insulation, which is much better at handling moisture and continues to insulate, whereas down cannot. So that's why I tend to recommend people use 2-bag systems. There's an economical reason, but certainly there's a performance advantage to having a synthetic outer layer that your moisture is all going to condense in versus in your down layer. Yeah, 2-bag system doesn't really have any strong advantages outside of sub-freezing temperatures, and typically even typically like below 20, like into 15 degrees and below. In the summer, there's really no advantage to a 2-bag system, and it's almost impossible to use a 2-bag system. Even if you had 2 50-degree bags, you're still now looking at something that's going to keep you warm down into the 30s, and that's just not realistic in most summer conditions. There's no performance advantage, because in the summer, as that moisture passes through your bag, it's actually going to make it all the way to the outside and then evaporate, whereas in the winter it's going to get stuck inside and freeze. So there's absolutely no advantage to a 2-bag system in the summer. So certainly one of the questions that we get a lot is how could I use a quilt when it's so cold out? How can I use a quilt in the winter? And draft management becomes the biggest issue in making quilt a functional winter piece for you. And the easiest answer for draft management is quilt layering size. If you're trying to get away with the smallest quilt possible, that's probably not the right strategy in the winter, as those smaller quilts allow a little bit of air in and out, and as it's 0 degrees outside, a little bit of 0 degree air is a lot different than a little bit of 50 degree air. And so the biggest consideration to using your quilts in the winter is to size them appropriately. Also, when using a 2-quilt system, it's very advantageous to size your outer quilt one size larger in the width and sometimes in the length if you're at the very top end of the length spectrum, so that outer bag is not compressing the inner bag. The great advantage of a Revelation Apex is its modular width, right? All quilts are modular in width through the torso, and then the ability with a zipper footbox, you can zip it up as much or as little as you need to fit over whatever bag you're using. This gives you options to layer our Revelation Apex quilt with any bag you would use. We obviously like to use them with our Enigmas and Revelations, but whatever bag you have, Converts, Conundrums, or anybody else's bag, the variable girth of the Revelation Apex makes it very easy to layer over other bags. Oftentimes I'll find myself, if I want more space, I'll only zip the very bottom of the footbox, or even just rely on the snaps, which this allows me to have only the bottom closed, which gives me the maximum amount of room underneath for kicking around. It's still, by being closed at the bottom, it still catches at the back of my bag, but it gives me all kinds of room. So the variable girth system makes it really easy to layer over whatever bag you need to or want to. There's only really 2 downsides to a potential 2-bag system, and one of the downsides is weight. One dedicated winter down bag should be able to perform the same task as a 2-bag system, but be lighter. Obviously you have to deal with condensation, as we talked about earlier, but that is one downside to a 2-bag system, is going to weigh a little more. The other downside of the 2-bag system, as we mentioned earlier, is you really have to be very intentional about how you size your bags, so that your outer bag is big enough that you're not compressing your inner bag and compromising the loftability of that inner bag as a down bag. The outside, the synthetic insulated bag, compression isn't as critical to the insulation component. Loft isn't as critical to the insulated component as it is with the down bag. So you just have to make sure you're sizing that outside bag accordingly. Sleeping pad layering is important because I believe if you want to sleep out to 0 degrees, you have to have at least R value of 6. And so there are certainly some pads like an X-Therm, there are certainly some pads that can get you really close to that and are warm on their own. But layering 2 pads will certainly increase the insulation. The best way to do that is with your primary insulated pad, your primary air inflated pad. Most people would use an X-Therm in these kind of conditions, and then layer a thin closed cell foam over that so that you're getting to at least an R6 for 0 degrees or an R8 for like -20 degrees. And so it's really easy. You lay those 2 pads over each other, and then you use our pad straps, slide the pad strap over, and it keeps the pads from drifting apart. This is also a great opportunity if you picked up a replacement set of pad straps. You can put an additional strap or 2 over the pads to keep them together, since the one pad strap may not be enough to keep them from moving apart. But additional pad straps are cheap. You can also makeshift pretty much any kind of strap you want to hold those pads together. Moisture management is especially a big deal when it gets really cold. And the thing I think that people do wrong most of the time is that they sleep too hot. They pile all their insulation in, they get all their jackets on, they get in their 2-bag system, and they feel really toasty, and it feels warm, and it's very comforting and reassuring, and then they go to sleep. All of that insulation, probably more insulation than is needed for the temperature outside, starts to really heat that body up, and you pump a lot of moisture into your system. So the best thing you can do to keep the moisture down in your winter system is to really layer appropriately and not be running yourself too hot, that you pump a lot more moisture into the system. The second thing that you can do, and this is an either or, is you can wear a vapor barrier layer. A lot of companies make next to skin vapor barrier. You can sometimes use your rain gear or wind gear depending on how breathable it is. And our 20-degree wind gear would make a fantastic vapor barrier. 20D wind gear would make a great vapor barrier. Basically, a vapor barrier stops that moist air that's coming off your body from leaving that layer and floating into your other layers. And so if you wear our 20D windsuit, our Copperfield gear over your base layers when you sleep, then any moisture that you're pumping out, depending on how hot you get, any moisture you're pumping out is staying trapped in those layers and not getting into your insulation. So the best way to manage moisture is to not overheat, and then if you really find yourself struggling with a lot of moisture issues, to go to a vapor barrier to keep that moisture trapped just against your skin on your base layer so that it's not in your insulation.